On December 21, 1943, a B-24 Liberator bomber took off from Ladd Field near Fairbanks, Alaska, on a routine test flight. The aircraft was part of a lend-lease program, one of thousands of American planes being transferred to the Soviet Union to aid the war effort against Nazi Germany. The crew consisted of 5 men. Among them was Leon Crane, a 24-year-old co-pilot from Philadelphia, who had been in Alaska for only a few months. It was the shortest day of the year, and at that latitude, daylight lasted barely 4 hours. The temperature on the ground was minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit. In the air, it would be far colder. The flight was supposed to be routine. They would test the aircraft's systems, fly a standard pattern, and return to base. Nothing about the mission suggested danger. But somewhere over the Charley River region, approximately 80 miles southeast of Fairbanks, something went catastrophically wrong. The exact cause was never determined. The aircraft may have experienced engine failure or structural problems. What is known is that the B-24 suddenly went into an uncontrollable spin. The pilot ordered the crew to bail out. Leon Crane was the only one who made it out of the aircraft alive. He parachuted into the frozen wilderness of the Yukon, with nothing but the clothes on his back. Leon Crane landed in waist-deep snow in a frozen forest. The temperature was approximately minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit. He was wearing his flight suit, leather jacket, and standard military boots, none of which were designed for extended survival in the Alaskan wilderness. He had no food, no shelter, no matches, no weapon, no survival kit. The parachute had saved his life, but now he was alone in one of the most hostile environments on Earth. He could see smoke rising in the distance where the B-24 had crashed. He considered walking toward the wreckage, but realized the terrain was impassable. Deep snow, dense forest, and fading daylight made any movement treacherous. He decided to wait until morning. That first night, Leon Crane did not sleep. He could not. To sleep in those temperatures without shelter would mean death. He stomped his feet constantly to maintain circulation. He swung his arms. He moved in small circles, fighting the cold with motion. The forest was silent except for the creaking of frozen trees. He was utterly alone. When dawn finally came, he began walking toward the crash site, hoping to find supplies, or perhaps other survivors. After hours of struggling through the snow, he reached the wreckage. What he found offered no comfort. The wreckage of the B-24 was scattered across a wide area. The aircraft had disintegrated on impact, leaving twisted metal, shattered equipment, and debris half buried in the snow. Leon found the bodies of his crewmates. None had survived. He was the only one who had made it out of the aircraft before the crash. The scene was devastating, but Leon could not afford to grieve. He needed supplies to survive. He searched the wreckage methodically, digging through snow and debris with his bare hands. He found a few items that would prove critical: a box of matches, a pocket knife, a small piece of tarpaulin, and some parachute silk. He also found a sleeping bag, partially burned, but still functional. There was no food. Whatever rations had been aboard were destroyed in the crash or scattered beyond recovery. With these meager supplies, Leon Crane faced a stark reality. He was alone in the Alaskan wilderness in winter, at least 80 miles from the nearest settlement. The temperature would remain far below zero for months. No one knew exactly where the aircraft had gone down. Search parties might come, but they might not find him. He could wait and hope for rescue, or he could try to walk out. He chose to walk. Leon Crane walked southeast, following the frozen Charley River. He reasoned that the river would eventually lead to the Yukon River, and the Yukon would lead to settlements. It was sound logic, but the execution was brutal. The snow was waist-deep in places, sometimes deeper. Every step required enormous effort. His military boots were not insulated, and his feet began to suffer almost immediately. He wrapped them in parachute silk, which helped marginally, but the cold was relentless. He rationed his matches carefully, knowing they were his lifeline. Each night he would find a sheltered spot, dig into the snow, and build a small fire. The fire kept him alive, but barely. He huddled close to the flames, feeding them with whatever dead branches he could find, sleeping in short bursts before the cold woke him again. Food was the critical problem. He had none. The forest seemed empty of game. He tried to set snares using parachute cord, but caught nothing. After several days without eating, he began to experiment with whatever he could find. He scraped lichen from rocks and chewed it, finding it bitter but edible. He broke through the ice of small streams and caught tiny fish with his bare hands, eating them raw and whole. It was not enough to thrive, but it was enough to keep moving. The days blurred together in an endless cycle of walking, freezing, and starving. Leon lost track of time. He estimated he was covering perhaps 3 or 4 miles a day, sometimes less when the terrain became impassable. The frozen river was his guide, but it was treacherous. In some places, the ice was thin and he would break through into freezing water, soaking his boots and socks. Each time this happened, he had to stop immediately and build a fire to dry his footwear, using precious matches and precious time. If he continued with wet feet in those temperatures, frostbite would claim his toes within hours. The cold was a constant enemy, but so was hunger. His body was consuming itself. He could feel his ribs through his flight suit. His face grew gaunt. His movements became slower and more labored. The lichen and occasional raw fish provided minimal calories, not nearly enough to sustain the effort required to walk through deep snow in sub-zero temperatures. He began to have thoughts of giving up. The sleeping bag and the fire could become a final resting place. He could simply stop, lie down, and let the cold take him peacefully. But something kept him moving. He thought of his family in Philadelphia. He thought of the crew members he had left behind in the wreckage. He had survived when they had not. He owed it to them to keep going. Approximately 3 weeks into his ordeal, Leon Crane discovered something that changed everything. Following the frozen river, he came upon a small trapper's cabin. It was abandoned, clearly unused for some time, but it was shelter, real shelter, with walls and a roof and a door that closed. He pushed inside and found the remnants of a wilderness life, a small stove, some basic tools, a few cans of food long past their prime, and most importantly, more matches. The cabin became his base camp. He stopped walking and focused on survival. The stove transformed his existence. He could now maintain constant warmth, drying his clothes properly, sleeping through the night without waking in fear of freezing. He found fishing line and hooks among the trapper's supplies and began catching fish through holes in the river ice more effectively. He discovered a small cache of beans and rice, which he rationed carefully. The calories were still insufficient, but they were better than lichen. His body slowly stabilized. He stopped losing weight as rapidly. His mind cleared. He began to believe he might actually survive, but he was still trapped. The nearest settlement was weeks away on foot, and he was too weak to make the journey. He decided to wait in the cabin and hope for rescue. Leon Crane spent over a month in the trapper's cabin, slowly regaining his strength. He developed routines to structure his days. Morning fishing, afternoon wood gathering, evening cooking and resting. He repaired his clothing using materials he found in the cabin, reinforcing his boots with leather scraps and creating better insulation for his hands. He kept a rough calendar, scratching marks into the wooden wall to track the passing days. The isolation was profound. He had not seen another human being since the crash. He talked to himself constantly, sometimes arguing both sides of imaginary conversations just to hear a voice. He thought about his family, his childhood, his future if he survived. He made plans. He made promises. The days grew imperceptibly longer as winter slowly loosened its grip. By late January, he noticed the light lasting a little longer each day. Spring was still months away, but the psychological effect was significant. He was not just surviving, he was waiting for the world to thaw. He knew that when conditions improved, he would have to make a choice: stay in the cabin and hope rescuers eventually found him, or attempt to walk out while he still had the strength. Either option carried enormous risk. In early February, approximately 58 days after the crash, Leon Crane's ordeal came to an unexpected end. He heard a sound that at first he did not recognize: the barking of dogs. He stepped outside the cabin and saw a dog sled team approaching along the frozen river. The driver was Albert Ames, a local trapper who had been traveling his trapline and noticed smoke rising from a cabin that should have been empty. Ames later described his shock at finding a gaunt, bearded stranger standing in the doorway, barely able to speak. Leon Crane was saved. Ames transported him by dog sled to the nearest settlement, the small village of Woodchopper, on the Yukon River. From there, word was sent to military authorities. A rescue aircraft was dispatched. Leon was flown to a hospital in Fairbanks, where doctors treated him for malnutrition, frostbite, and exposure. He had lost over 50 pounds. Several of his toes would later require amputation due to frostbite damage. But he was alive. He had survived 58 days alone in the Alaskan wilderness in winter, with almost no equipment, no food, and no training for the conditions he faced. The military classified his survival as extraordinary. They were not wrong. Leon Crane recovered slowly in the military hospital in Fairbanks. His body had been pushed to its absolute limits, and rebuilding would take months. Doctors documented his case carefully, studying how a man with no wilderness survival training had managed to stay alive for nearly 2 months in conditions that should have killed him within days. The answer seemed to lie in a combination of factors: his physical fitness, his mental resilience, his willingness to eat anything to survive, and a large measure of luck. Finding the trapper's cabin had been the turning point. Without it, he almost certainly would have died. After his recovery, Crane returned to active duty. He continued to fly for the military throughout the remainder of World War II, though he never returned to Alaska. He rarely spoke publicly about his ordeal, preferring to leave those 58 days in the past. When asked about his survival, he would deflect with modest answers, attributing his survival to luck rather than skill. But those who studied his case recognized something more. Leon Crane had demonstrated an extraordinary will to live. When everything suggested he should give up, he had kept walking, kept fighting, kept surviving. That determination, more than anything else, was what brought him home. Leon Crane lived a long and quiet life after the war. He settled in California, married, raised a family, and worked as an engineer. He never sought fame for his survival story, and for decades, few people outside military circles knew what he had endured. The crash site in the Yukon wilderness was eventually found and documented. The remains of his 4 crewmates were recovered and given proper military burials. The trapper's cabin that saved his life still stands, preserved as a historical site in what is now the Yukon-Charley River's National Preserve. It is a remote and rarely visited place, a silent monument to one man's determination to survive. Leon Crane died in 2002 at the age of 83. His obituary mentioned his wartime service but said little about those 58 days in the Alaskan winter. He preferred it that way. He had never seen himself as a hero. He was simply a man who refused to die when dying would have been easy. The wilderness had tested him in ways few people ever experience. He had eaten lichen and raw fish. He had walked through waist-deep snow and temperatures that could kill in minutes. He had faced the vast indifference of nature and survived. That was enough. That was everything.